Jerica, I want to tell you that I thought about that all by myself, but I didn't. Reminded me, so. But thank you. Here's a surprise for Thanksgiving. As a healthcare provider, there is no such thing as holidays.
Yeah, I know, because I don't know holidays, so I was expecting one a year.
Well, Bernice, what's the answer? Gymnophoratus and kindness around holidays, not a chance. So, but thank you for laughing though, Bernice. I appreciate that. All right, guys, we're on the endocrine system, chapter 39. I don't know why people have a hard time with this, but what does it mean to be endocrine? It means there are no ducts. D-U-C-T-S, not D-U-C-K-S, okay? There are no ducts. So, Jim, will you potentially tease us on the final to be tempted? Oh, hell yes I am. That's embarrassing, so we have to know that, okay? So, the bottom line is that the endocrine system consists of organs that make chemicals called hormones that get released not by duct, often into the circulatory system, but not exclusively. They go to some other site and bring about change, okay? So that sounded like a lawyer talking, right? They didn't say anything. Well, that's exactly what happens, that's what they do. So, there are 4 different ways. Listen, these are all hormones, hormone modalities. It's all part of the endocrine system, okay? But these are 4 different ways that hormones can be secreted. One is neurocrine. So, they get released into the bloodstream by neurons, okay? We're going to talk about this stuff. Endocrine just normally secretes into the bloodstream, and then they go to some target organ. Paracrine, so you got a cell that makes some hormone, and it releases the hormone, and what does it do? It impacts its neighbors, okay? And then autocrine, you got a cell that makes some hormone, it secretes it, and then that in turn binds back onto that particular cell and has an effect on that particular cell. Does that make sense to you guys? So I want you to know all 4 of these modalities, okay? So no one asked. So, I mean, Margrea sort of asked before failing at lobbying for an early dismissal tonight. So we're done with the material for the next test. The next test is just on the renal system, okay? But Jim, there weren't that many PowerPoint slides. It's that important to your practice, okay? So what about the remaining stuff we're going to cover, 39, 40, and 41? That's on the final. It is no more. Those chapters are not given any more weight than any of the other chapters from the entire semester, okay? So chapters 39, 40, 41 are going to have roughly the same number of questions on the final that every other chapter has on the final. So, dude, I mastered 39, 40, 41, but I didn't really give a whole lot of time the rest of the semester. Well, we all know what that means, right? So when I say it's comprehensive and equal, it's comprehensive and tests equally from every chapter, roughly, okay? So, hormones are divided into 2 categories. There are those that are water soluble, and guys, this is like supreme attention. This chapter is ridiculously hierarchically organized to make outlining super easy, okay? So, there are water-soluble and lipid-soluble hormones. Most hormones are water-soluble. There are some that are lipid, those are few. Okay? The water-soluble ones are either proteins, hence the phrase peptides, or tyrosine-derived catecholamines. What the hell does that mean? Well, you guys have all heard of catecholamines: dopamine, epinephrine, and norepinephrine, right? Jim, those are neurotransmitters. Yeah, they're also hormones. So, what are the water-soluble ones? The water-soluble ones are either peptides or the catecholamines, okay? It's extremely important that you know this because of all the stuff that I'm going to talk about. Water-soluble hormones behave entirely differently from the lipid-soluble ones, okay? So, what about the lipid-soluble ones? Every one of the lipid-soluble ones is a steroid hormone except for the thyroid hormones, okay? Jim, are you going to test this on that? Yes, obviously, okay? Every steroid hormone starts as cholesterol first, made by the liver, not as a cholesterol that we ingest, okay? The thyroid hormone is a fat. It's not a steroid, but it behaves just like the steroid hormones do, and that's why we call it a lipid. It is a lipid, but that's why we have it with the steroids, because everything I'm going to say about water-soluble only pertains to water-soluble. Everything I say about lipid-soluble only pertains to lipid-soluble, and it's a matter of life and death. You have to know this stuff, okay? So, there are receptors for hormones. In the water-soluble variety, where are the receptors? Outside the cell. They're on the cell membrane. Okay? Listen to the sentence I'm going to say. All water-soluble hormones bind to a receptor that's on the cell membrane, and they bind to it on the outside of the cell. Water-soluble hormones never come into the cell except to be degraded. You with me? Water-soluble hormones bind to a receptor that's attached to the cell membrane, and it's on the outside of the cell. Water-soluble hormones never enter into the cell to have their action. Okay? Lipid-soluble hormones always enter the cell, and they go through the nuclear membrane, whether by themselves or chaperoned, and they attach to the DNA. Okay? Lipid-soluble hormones go right through the phospholipid bilayer. They go into the cell like dissolves like. Okay? And they go through the nuclear envelope. Sometimes they go by themselves, certain hormones. Other hormones have to be attached to some mediator in the cytoplasm, but it doesn't matter. Ultimately, they go into the nucleus, and they glom on to the DNA. And what does a lipid-soluble hormone do once it's glommed on to the DNA? It triggers transcription. Okay? Jim, I've got these pills for you, bro. You can be really big if you want to. No, thanks. The government's a conspiracy, dude. They know this is healthy, but they have a market on it. Yeah, okay, just stop talking ignorance. I'm not ignorant. I'm tuning you out. No, dude, it's okay, bro. Right? Why are they bad? Guys, so now you know why they're bad. Because they flipping go into the nucleus, and they glom on to the DNA, and they turn on stuff that's supposed to be turned off. But they go to specific parts of the DNA. Guys, listen to me. What's one of the reasons why immunotherapy and using genetic manipulations of DNA, what's one reason why it's been so unsuccessful up till now? You know, I said to you guys, Emperor of All Maladies, when we had Patho 1, read Emperor of All Maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee. Mukherjee wrote another book called Cell. okay? I'm not suggesting that you read it or don't read it, but I am telling you this. One of the things that he says in there, and at least he's honest about gene therapy. It's the reason why in Patho 1 I didn't give it much shrift when we talked about treatment for various cancer pathologies. When we stick something into a nucleus to attach to DNA, even if we programmed it and coded it a certain way to attach to a specific part of the DNA, we can't guarantee that it won't go elsewhere also. So he records some amazing dishonesty and unethical shit that happened at some of America's, that's not what the book is about, just part of what he talks about, at some of America's best hospitals, where doctors knew shit was not right with the patient, but they didn't say anything until the patient died. And they covered their tracks because they wanted to be on the cutting edge of the gene therapy, get their names and their savings accounts augmented dramatically, okay? So when you take roids to get bigger, what does it do? It turns on the transcription machine, but it also turns on mitosis. Because that's the whole point of taking roids, right? We all have genetic maxes. So you can only be so strong genetically. So how do you bypass that? Well, instead of doing hypertrophy of muscle, we'll do hyperplasia, we'll build new tissue, put some roids in, and then you're off to the races of potentially turning on sections that should not be turned on. And after all, what is cancer at the end of the day conceptually? Out of control mitosis. The regulatory stops are going to hell. Okay? You hear what I'm saying, you guys? That's why roids are bad. Okay? So, when we're talking water soluble, now, we're only talking water soluble hormones now. What do? They bind to some receptor on the cell membrane, right? So what does that mean if they don't come in? They have to trigger secondary messengers. You guys with me? At the end of the day, what happens? So here's a hormone. Here's the receptor. It binds to the receptor. That sets into motion a chain reaction of chemical reactions that usually lands up bringing about a downstream phosphorylation. Okay? So we're going to look at two particular G-protein-linked receptors. So we have GSs and GQs, okay? So what's a G? Here we're only talking water soluble, right? Because lipid soluble doesn't need to attach to a receptor outside the cell. It goes into the cell and it goes into the flipping nucleus, okay? So this is water soluble. So we're talking about GS. The GS-linked receptors, what do? The secondary messenger is cyclic AMP. Okay? What does cyclic AMP do? It activates protein kinase A. Do we have to know it? I'm spending time talking about it. Of course you have to know it. Okay? So, GS-linked water-soluble protein receptors activate their secondary messenger is cyclic AMP. It activates protein kinase A. Well, who cares about kinase? Guys, listen to me. Stanford did this amazing study a year or two ago. They borrowed 10,000 personal computers. They got people who were living at homes all over the world and said, we need your computer's processing time between like midnight and 4 o'clock in the morning. They linked 10,000 computers into a network simulating quantum computing. Okay? Not testing you on any of this quantum computing stuff. Why do they do that? Because what do protein kinases do? They phosphorylate molecules. When you get phosphorylation, that's making an inactive protein or biomolecule. When you phosphorylate it, you turn it on. In cancer research, Stanford has discovered there are at least 127 kinases. So how the hell do you get all this out of control activity that goes on in cancer cells, one of the things that happens is you activate protein kinases when they shouldn't be activated. They phosphorylate some stupid molecule downstream, which turns it on, and you're on the way to cancer. Does that make sense to you guys? So, protein kinase A, I'm not saying that causes cancer. I'm just giving you context for why is this important to know. So GS-linked water-soluble protein receptors for water-soluble hormones that bond to a GS-linked protein receptor. What's the secondary messenger? Cyclic AMP. What does that activate? Protein kinase A. What does protein kinase A do? It causes downstream phosphorylation, activating a set of molecules. You don't need to know what the molecules are. Does it make sense to you guys? Okay. So, which hormones do this? Well, there's a list. I'm not going to read the list to you. You guys have to know every flipping one of those hormones. Okay? Bottom line is, you guys already do know most of them. Okay? ACTH, TSH, FSH, LH, those are 4 of the hormones that are in the anterior pituitary, right? Epinephrine, well, you know about epinephrine. Parathyroid hormone, calcium balance, we know about that. ADH, just got through doing the renal unit. That's stored in the posterior pit, made in the hypothalamus. And glucagon, we're going to get to glucagon. It is the yin to insulin's yang, okay? That was GS proteins. What about GQ proteins? GS proteins, cyclic AMP is a secondary messenger. Protein kinase A gets activated due to downstream phosphorylation. What about GQ? GQ is inositol triphosphate, IP3, or diacylglycerol, DAG. Okay? And you guys have probably seen cyclic AMP, DAG, and IP3 a trillion times in other classes, hopefully. Okay? So here you have IP3 and DAG as the secondary messengers, and what do? They activate protein kinase C, which does phosphorylation. GS, cyclic AMP, protein kinase A. GQ, it's IP3 or DAG, and it's protein kinase C. Make sense? Okay. Don't care about this. I don't care about the protein kinase receptors. Amplification. So listen. Only with water-soluble hormones do we do amplification. Listen. Only with water-soluble hormones do we do amplification. What the hell does that mean? We need very little water-soluble hormone, and it begins a chain reaction that gets a very big response. That's amplification. Does that make sense to you guys? Yes? Okay. So, what does that mean? We need precious little hormone to get all the great responses that we get. And, Jim, do lipid-soluble hormones do amplification? Never, because they're dangerous. Okay? So, I already told you guys about lipid-soluble hormones, go in the nucleus, gene expression. So, where do most hormones get made? Well, the water-soluble ones, obviously, rough endoplasmic reticulum, ribosomes, right? Okay, no big deal. And then they get cleaved and get activated. Obviously, you guys know that. Why am I telling you this? Because it's all programmed in the DNA, right? The hormones. So they get made, they have a back structure, a base structure, they get made in the ribosomes, rough endoplasmic reticulum. The Golgi apparatus, they end up doing some clipping and snipping and adjusting groups, and then they get packaged and re-released. Does that make sense to you guys? Where do the peptide hormones get secreted from? Well, usually in vesicles via exocytosis. Okay? I'm not going to test you on that, but I want you to know they get packaged and they get releases of vesicles. Listen, it's okay to make and store water-soluble hormones. Okay? It's okay to make and store water-soluble hormones. We never make and store lipid-soluble hormones with one exception. With lipid-soluble hormones, we make them on demand when they're needed. Okay? So, I said there was an exception about storing for lipid-soluble. Water-soluble, we make them, we do amplification, we can store them, we secrete them when we need them. You guys with me? Lipid-soluble, we make them on demand. We never store them, they don't ever do amplification, with one exception, thyroid hormones. So we're going to come back to thyroid hormones, but just pause for a second. What the hell do thyroid hormones do? They regulate metabolism in our cells. Okay? So listen, yes, it's a lipid-soluble hormone. Yes, it has potential to be dangerous. But what happens if something happens with the thyroid gland temporarily? If we don't have stored thyroid hormone, we can't do metabolism. If we can't do metabolism, the cells can't process glucose and make ATP. Does that make sense to you guys? So we have to store some. So pause. And this is getting ahead, and I will come back to it later. There are a few autoimmune thyroid disorders. There's one of them that's known for causing hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism. How the hell can you have one autoimmune disorder bring about both hypo and hyperthyroidism? Here's how. If you're harming, and I'm going to give you great explanations, well, I don't know if they're great, but detailed explanations when we actually talk about the thyroid specifically. But it's the reason why, it's the reason why there's so much weird shit that happens with the thyroid. So, as the immune system is attacking the thyroid gland's not releasing thyroid hormone, the patient's hypothyroid. As the destruction continues to happen, you eat and destroy tissue. Well, when the tissue that contains the boundary line that contains the stored thyroid hormone is destroyed, all of a sudden you dump into the patient's blood a huge amount of thyroid hormone. And they can actually die from it. You can get thyroid storm. That particular autoimmune disease is called Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and we're going to get back to it. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? All right. So, steroid hormones, made on demand, never stored. Okay. Lipid hormones. There's one exception to that, and that is the thyroid hormone. That's made on demand, but it's also made and stored. Okay. So, what kinds of factors go into influencing hormone secretion? For the anterior pituitary, and so I am assuming that you know the hormones that are in the anterior pituitary. Okay, we'll talk about some of them. If you want an easy way to remember it, flat pig. FSH, LH, ACTH, TSH, prolactin, nothing. But you have to make it work. And growth hormone. Flat pig. Easy. And anterior pituitary. Makes sense, everybody? And 4 of them, which we went over, are GS receptor, GS linked, cyclic AMP, protein kinase A, water-soluble hormones. Okay? So what goes into these things? Well, there's circadian rhythms, right? Sleep-wake cycles, light-dark cycles, eating, the menstrual cycle, 28 days. Yeah, that's a joke, okay? 21 to 45 days with no meaningful need, okay? And that's totally normal and healthy. We'll talk about that. Feeding and fasting cycles. We're not actually meant to be scarfing down at midnight. I'm not saying you haven't done it. We're not meant to be wolfing down a bunch of food at midnight, okay? So we have these cyclical releases, right? If there is a stressor, that can change the cycle. And, if there's a stressor, you need some extra, so it's homeostasis, right? Homeostasis is a dynamic equilibrium. It shifts. If there's an acute stressor, hey, you're really studying hard, you have to go to work, you actually need some food, if you don't have diabetes problem, you're not going to become hypoglycemic. But what happens is glucagon, we'll get to that not today, winds up being released so you can increase serum glucose levels so that you can not pass out and not faint until you can get some food in your body. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. Oh yeah, so we'll talk about growth hormone. If you give a patient, let's say they have a hormone deficiency or they need hormone supplementation. If you give a patient hormone at a time when it's not normally made and released in the normal cyclical process, then you're actually doing nothing for the patient. So when we talk about growth hormone, if you give growth hormone to a patient at like 3 in the afternoon, they're wasting their time. It'll do almost nothing. Does that make sense to you guys? You have to simulate what the physiological pattern is of release to do hormone supplementation. So, you guys all know, right? Negative feedback mechanism. There's a thermostat here that is now no longer under Jim's control very, very, very simply. But so we set it at 74. And what does that mean? That means when we get 74, it turns off. That's negative feedback. What's negative feedback? When you get what you want, it turns off. Why does that happen? Because we don't want excess. That's why. There are very few non-pathological positive feedback mechanisms in the body. Okay? Oxytocin release from the posterior pituitary during contractions, labor for a pregnant mom, or for milk to get expressed out through the nipple for a mom who's nursing her baby, that is a positive feedback mechanism. Most positive feedback mechanisms that happen in the human body are cancer-related or metabolic derangement or whatever, they're pathological. What is positive feedback? When you get what you want, you get more. Okay? Oh, kind of like Americans operate, right? No, sorry, shouldn't say that. Gastrin is another example of positive feedback mechanism, right? You get food in your stomach, you want to increase its digestion, and it's being expressed out, the kind being expressed out, so we release gastrin, which comes back and tells the stomach, do your job more. That's a positive feedback mechanism. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So how do we process when we're done using a hormone? How do we process it? Well, water-soluble ones, they end up getting secreted in the filtrate. I'm not asking you guys to test for the renal unit, obviously. What happens to lipid-soluble ones? Pause. That's an interesting question. So either they're hepatically or renally cleared. Here's the problem with lipid-soluble hormones. Because they're lipids, they can tend to be stored in adipose tissue and potentially for quite some time. So when somebody goes off the pill, there are a trillion reasons why people have a difficult time getting pregnant afterwards, but that's one of them. There may be lingering stores of progestin or whatever, okay, in the body. Does that make sense to you guys? So what about the yo-yos that are putting roids in to get all buff and everything? Right. They're not putting physiological doses in, they're putting pharmacologic doses in, and they don't need to put it in. And so a bunch lands up getting stored, and you have potentially long-term consequences. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. Half-life, I don't care about half-life at all. I do care about the I do care about the difference between physiologic and pharmacologic. So what do we say? Steroid hormones, lipid hormones get made on demand. So we make and release only the little amount that we need. With water-soluble ones, we release very little. And why can we release very little? Because we get amplification. Make sense? Okay. So when you put, Jim, what's all this bullshit you said? I actually just got through emailing 51 articles on how contraceptive medicine for females increases the risks of at least 2 or 3 different kinds of cancer, besides all of the stroke and cardiovascular issues. Okay? I'm not saying don't take it. Do whatever the hell floats your boat. Okay? But 51 articles, and I mean, there are 750 million or 800 million women in the world that are on birth control medicine. So you usually only find articles about how they actually reduce the risk of cancer, but you usually find those in lay press. Why? Well, because we will affect what is like a $500 billion a year business. Okay? Jim, that's so cynical. No, that's reality, guys. I highly suggest every one of you read and search, look at the New York Times and read the Paradise Papers, okay? About how extremely rich, elite Ivy League schools that charge a fortune for students to go there and give out the 85% of all the students that go to Harvard and to Princeton come from homes that make $500,000 a year or more. And yet Harvard is the most well-endowed, financially well-endowed institution in the world, besides Oxford. So how is it that poor kids can't go there? It just costs too much money. Well, they actually shelter most of their endowments. They don't even have to disclose it in offshore accounts, okay? So am I cynical? No, the world we live in isn't a benign little fairy tale where we just merrily go through and just have fun and have life, okay? So when we are honest about birth control medicine, we are affecting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue every month. Every month, okay? So we say, no, they're safe because it's low dose. All of that was to say, that statement, well, it's low dose. There is no such thing as a pharmacologic dose being remotely close to a physiologic dose. In physiologic doses, we might be talking nanograms, okay, per milliliter or per deciliter. By definition, anything that's pharmacologic, so listen, nanograms. So let me give you an analogy. So the tip of a typical safety pin, okay, we compare that size to a semi-truck. The tip of the safety pin is the physiologic dose of the hormone. The semi-truck is the low dose birth control medicine. Exactly. Pharmacologic doses are by definition gargantuan. When you take those with any sort of regularity, what do? You reset all the homeostatic defaults. And with that comes consequences long term. Does that make sense to you guys? Yeah.
So when they tell you like, we have one that is a neural hormone, that's false?
I don't want to talk about that one. Okay, and that's a really good question. The bottom, so email, okay, and I'll happily respond to that. Right? It's a good question, okay? But 99.999% of all the people who are on contraceptive medicine, it's hormones, okay? Yeah.
Mostly just the pill you're talking about. What about like an IUD with progesterone?
Oh, I'm talking about any hormone that's being released, okay? No matter where it's at, no matter how it's released.
So what would be your suggestion for contraception for females?
I'm not your rabbi, Jolene. I'm honored you would ask that question. I have 5 children, infer. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I'm with you, it's tough, okay? Sex is natural to the human species and not just for procreation. And no offense to anybody who says otherwise. So what do you do? Here's the deal too, guys, just straight up since we're on the topic. If you've done any kind, even low dose kind, any kind of birth control medicine, no matter where it's at, how it's delivered. But if you have continuous deliveries, so like the implant or the patch, that's even worse than taking the pills. And if you've been on it for 3 or more years and it doesn't have to be consecutively, you are at significantly greater risk for all kinds of things. Cardiovascular issues, strokes, blood clots, pulmonary embolisms. I'm not kidding you guys, okay? Oh, did you have a joint or two, or a cigarette or two, or did you drink or two during any of that time? You just jacked the probability up significantly. Right, so does it go down when you stop using the medicine? Many of the risks go away after a decade. Some of the risks stay for a lifetime. So I got asked by a friend of mine that I went to law school with, whose daughter told him, she was visiting him home from college. She was visiting him and she said, "Dad, could you give me my purse?" And he grabbed the purse and out fell the birth control pills. He's a brilliant lawyer in Chicago, and he didn't go to medical school. He understands things, okay? And she said, "Well, Daddy, the clinic at college gave it to me to help me with my migraines." Okay, so if you have a healthcare provider that gives you the pill for migraines, change your healthcare provider. If you have migraines, you're the most likely to develop a cancer or a cardiovascular event. Just saying. I don't care about anecdotes. I don't care about what anybody had to say. I've had students that tell me that they've said what I just said. They've gone to their OBGYN, and one of them said to me, "Hey, the OBGYN, my OBGYN said, I've been on it for 10 years and nothing's happened to me." It's like, right, you're young. I'm drinking and smoking weed. Nothing's happened to me, moron. Right? It takes time for things to get. I'm not saying you're a moron if you do those things. I'm saying when you say, "Look at me, nothing's happened," that's complete folly speaking. It takes time for things to break down and then give you continual bad feedback. Okay? The irony is, and so I don't want to know any of your doctor's names. Please don't tell me them ever. The student told me her doctor's name, and so I had to say to her, I can't talk any more about this because I'm actually analyzing for practice right now. Okay? So, there we go. Listen carefully. Receptors and cells don't always want to be stimulated by hormones. Okay? So, I'm going to give you an example. Glucose. How do you get, and we're going to go over this in 2 weeks, so you don't have to worry about writing it down right now, but I want you to get this. So, you stop at Sonic and you get cheese fries on the way home. On Thanksgiving morning, there's nothing better than having whipped cream and, that 1,300, calorie, 58, 60 grams of saturated fat frappuccino. But it's Thanksgiving, we're only doing it once, and then you eat turkey, and then pie, and you have some booze. So you put carbs and fats and all kinds of stuff in you. So you're floating high serum glucose levels. What happens? Your pancreas starts cranking out insulin, right? To tell the cells you need to take up all this extra glucose. So the insulin molecule from the pancreas floats along and it binds to a receptor, and we can't get this why diabetes is as serious as a heart attack. It's just as serious as cancer, guys. It's no laughing matter. Okay? Far more people suffer from diabetes and its sequela than from cancer. Okay? Cancer's sexy from an intellectual perspective. Diabetes is what you're going to see here. Okay? So the cell keeps on triggering, and you know what? The receptors get together and they kvetch and they say, we're sick of having to take glucose in. We don't need this extra glucose. So the first response is to reduce the receptor's affinity to bond the insulin. Did that make sense to you guys? So they morph and they don't bond as successfully. What does the pancreas do? I got a lot of glucose floating around, I'm not doing my job. I need to create a few more cells in the beta region of the islets of Langerhans to make more insulin. So there's a temporary inflammation of the pancreas, and the pancreas makes more insulin. And that insulin, by golly, tries to bond by hook or by crook, and the cells get pissed. Now, obviously, I'm anthropomorphizing for a reason to make it entertaining, okay? I want you to get the point. So, all right, we've got 5 receptors. They kind of change their receptivity, their affinity for the hormone. Well, the pancreas isn't getting the flipping message. So now we're angry. What am I going to do? I'm going to downregulate. I'm actually going to take out of commission 3 of the 5 receptors. Oh, well, that's new. So that's inefficient. It's efficient from the cell's perspective in the short run. But that causes a whole lot more glucose to be floating around in the blood in the long run. So what does the pancreas do? Gotta make a little bit more insulin. And you're on your way to becoming type 2 diabetic. That's how it happens. Okay? Does that make sense to you guys? So what if I'm a diabetic? Can I change? Well, we'll talk about that in 2 weeks, not tonight. Bottom line is, we change the affinity of the receptors for the hormones, so that way the cells can control how much they need to be doing what they're doing, and we can downregulate the receptors. You know why exercise? Listen, if you're a diabetic or on your way to becoming type 2 diabetic, if you're a type 2 diabetic or you're on your way to becoming a type 2 diabetic, do you know why you could eat right for the next 50 years and you're still not going to be perfectly managed? You know it's going to be perfectly managed once you're a type 2 insulin-dependent diabetic. No one is. But you know why eating healthy is only half the battle? Excuse me. Precisely because of the downregulation thing. When you exercise, and that's why exercise is super good, so that you do it preemptively before you earn that gold medal of type 2. So you get to 2 miles on the treadmill and drop 20 pounds. Okay? Because you want to stay the flip away from being insulin-dependent diabetic or being a diabetic, period. What happens is, even if you can't, as a diabetic, upregulate healthy cells, we can upregulate, right? Hey, we've got only 2 receptors, I'm exercising a lot, I gotta jack up, I think I'm gonna add 3 more receptors because I need a lot more glucose so I can more effectively bond insulin. Does that make sense to you guys? What if you're a diabetic and you've done downregulation, or you're on your way to becoming a diabetic and you've done downregulation? It depends where, when in the process you are when you start to eat healthy and start to exercise. You might never be able to upregulate, but you know what you can do? You can make the receptors that are there super receptive for the little bit of insulin that floats around. Oh yeah! And in healthy people, you don't need that much insulin because the cells are hungry for glucose. And if you don't have a diabetic issue, if your pancreas isn't inflamed and churning out ridiculous amounts of insulin, exercise makes you need less insulin to take the glucose in. Exercise and diet ahead of time can virtually preempt type 2 diabetes. It is the one disease, I mean there are many that are preventable, but type 2 diabetes is utterly preventable in 99% of all the patients. So if you get it, that means you earned it. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. And it's all based on receptor affinities. and up and down regulation of receptors. Talk about that, talk about that. All right, so there are permissive hormones, okay? So what are permissive hormones? Well, thyroid hormone and growth hormone have to act together. We're going to look at cases in 2 weeks. If you have somebody making all the right amount of thyroid hormone, you don't have enough growth hormone, you don't get the benefit of the growth hormone. If you have all the growth hormone in the world being made, but you don't have enough thyroid hormone to increase metabolism, then you actually have very serious problems, which we'll talk about in 2 weeks. But that's like permissiveness. There's also the sequential hormones. So in the menstrual cycle, estrogen always comes before progesterone. So what does estrogen do? A million things. Amongst the million things that it does, it increases the progesterone receptors in the uterus for the second half of the menstrual cycle when progesterone is being released. So that progesterone hormone is more effective. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Agonists. Okay, so what's an agonist? An agonist is a molecule that has the same effect as a hormone. It isn't that particular hormone, but it can bind to that hormone's receptor and bring about that hormone's response. Does that make sense to you guys? Antagonists are a little different. So I guess the only ones I want you to know about are the ones that can bind to a receptor, but when they bind to the receptor, they don't trigger what the hormone normally triggers, and they're blocking the receptor from being able to receive the hormone it's designed to receive. Does that make sense to you guys? You want me to say that one again?
Yes.
Okay. Are you dying? Yes. Well, we still have to do it. So, an antagonist hormone, there are many different kinds. The only one I want you guys to know about, an antagonist hormone binds to a receptor for some hormone that it's antagonistic to. When it binds to that receptor, it does not trigger any reaction. And it's actually blocking that receptor from receiving the hormone that that receptor is designed for. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Pituitary. So pituitary is a big thing. Listen, what's the master gland? The hypothalamus. It controls everything, basically. All right? So the pituitary is called the hypophysis. It's below the hypothalamus, and there's the pituitary stalk, bless you, or the infundibulum that connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary. Okay? There are 2 lobes to the pituitary. There is the anterior pituitary, or the adenohypophysis. I want you to know both names. And there's the posterior pituitary, or the neurohypophysis. So listen, guys. How does the hypothalamus interact with the anterior pituitary? Through blood vessels. The hypothalamus makes releasing and inhibiting factors that go through the capillary bed that connects the hypothalamus with the adenohypophysis, and those releasing factors or inhibiting factors either say anterior pituitary, make and release flat pig, or don't. Does that make sense to you guys? What's the posterior pituitary? It's a storage vault, it's a safety deposit box. The hypothalamus makes oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone, often called vasopressin, okay? And it ships them down neurons into the neurohypophysis where they're stored. And it's at the level of the neurohypophysis. So what does the hypothalamus do with the posterior pituitary? It just says, hey, you know those 2 hormones are released? Yeah, let them go now. into the circulation. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, cool. Right, as we talked about. So this is a scary slide. You only need to know the stuff I'm going to talk about on the PowerPoint slides, okay? So this is, scary, whatever, all right? So we're moving past that. So, hormones of the posterior pituitary, I already talked to you about this. ADH, antidiuretic hormone, yay, we better know about it for the renal test in 2 weeks, right? And then there's oxytocin, and we talked about that also. And then I'm going to talk about this stuff. I do want to say this. So, and I don't remember if I said it to you guys or not. I know I said it to my AP2 lab. Scientists and the academic community is just as religious as the freaking televangelists on Friday evening, late when you're sick and you need amusement. Okay? And there's a guy, Loma Linda's, did I tell you guys this last week or whatever? No? Okay. There is Loma Linda Medical School in Cali is a phenomenal medical school. They turn out really amazing physicians. They have an amazing hospital complex. There is a man who got his PhD in economics who is full-time teaching staff there, and they call him a neuroeconomist. The only reason why I know about this guy is, there are 2 reasons. One is because a student here at CNM 2 years ago argued with me about how this guy was changing, all of modern medicine biology. The scary thing is there's some truth in terms of the academic aspect of things. So I'm not attacking Saint Charles Darwin, okay? There are lots of things, though, that we say that really are not supportable. So this schmuck has said, advertising companies pay this guy tens of millions of dollars a year, literally. And that's obviously why Loma Linda hasn't, because it puts them on the map in a bigger way. And he helps them figure out how to get us sexually turned on during advertising. Because we know that oxytocin gets released when there's sexual activity in humans. Because he's a neuroeconomist, whatever the flip that can mean, he has gotten away with creating a whole movement in the academic community that basically says, because we want to bow and make sure everybody knows St. Charles Darwin is the saint who described everything, okay? And this guy basically said that cuddling is the reason why we enjoy cuddling is because oxytocin gets released. So I asked the following critical thinking question. And I just want you, I'm not trying to be offensive at all. So when my 16-year-old demon daughter did really well on opening night, and my wife and I handed her a bouquet of flowers, and we hugged her, was that because we were thinking about having an orgasm for 16-year-old daughter? That's disgusting. Okay? We've just completely removed the whole notion of love and reduced it to strictly neurotransmitters and hormones. Hey, sorry guys, start thinking critically. You don't have to accept all the bullshit the short Jew in the front of the class or the other Gentiles in the front of the class who teach you things. You don't have to accept everything at face value in textbooks. For crying out loud, please think. Read Nafisi's book and realize the importance of acquiring and maintaining critical thinking skills. I had a chance to interact with this schmuck on the dais at a conference about a year ago. And this dude's creepy. And so I shook his hand and I said, give me a hug, would you please? Just come over to me. He had no idea what I was doing. So he gave me a hug. I said, ooh, I think I'm going to orgasm right now. And he looked back at me and he stepped back and I said, that's what I think of your bullshit theory. So Seriously, guys. The reason why when somebody's grieving, a hug helps them is because there's sexual satisfaction in a hug. Wow. That's just as religious as a freaky shit. That's all I'm saying. Okay? So, okay. We have a three-tiered axis for anterior pituitary. There's some Thanksgiving conversation for you. So, hypothalamus makes releasing and/or inhibiting factors, goes down the infundibulum and the capillary network to the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary makes and releases flat pig. So, just for shits and giggles, let's talk about the thyroid gland. So, we have thyroid releasing hormone that gets made and released by the hypothalamus, goes down the capillary bed to the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary makes and releases thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH. TSH goes where? To the thyroid gland. And what does the thyroid gland do? It makes T3 and T4, which we'll talk about, not right this moment, but those are the thyroid hormones. So what happens? This is negative feedback. The hypothalamus detects, if everything's working properly, hey, there's T3 and T4 circulating, I'm going to stop sending the message to the anterior pituitary. But wait, there's more. The anterior pituitary also detects that there's T3 and T4, and it stops making TSH. Why? Because we don't want too much T3 and T4. Does that make sense? So this is a negative feedback mechanism, which you guys have all heard about already a million times probably, and this is a three-tiered axis. With anterior pituitary, everything is three-tiered axis. So it's this, this, and this. When we talk about there being a primary hormonal problem, that's at the target organ. When we talk about there being a secondary hormonal problem, that's usually at the level of the pituitary. There are exceptions. They could also meet up with the hypothalamus. I'll tell you the exceptions. And then when we say there's a tertiary problem, it's up at the hypothalamus. Does that make sense to everybody? That's why you have to know the axis, okay? By the way, dopamine, neurotransmitter, and it's a hormone. Actually, dopamine is also prolactin inhibiting hormone. Wait, it inhibits the release of prolactin? Yes. In who? In all of us, and it's uniquely effective in men, unless you're taking roids. If you're taking roids to get big, the testicles shrivel up because they are a three-tier axis anterior pituitary organ, right? Hypothalamus releases what it does to the anterior pituitary, which goes to the testicles, and the testicles release testosterone, which is the switch to turn off. But when you're taking roids to get bigger, what are you doing? You are taking, first you're taking pharmacologic doses instead of physiologic doses. So that means you're driving in the semi-truck into the parking lot, okay? And then, if you're supplying testosterone, then there's no need for the testicles to keep making it, because that would be in abundance. Does that make sense? So how do roid guys get around that? Well, the way they get around that is by putting human chorionic gonadotropin, the pregnancy hormone, also into their body, so that they can counteract so their testicles don't shrink. How many of you know that HCG, men don't do pregnancy? Okay, we don't. Okay? So, HCG is not supposed to be in our circulatory system. When you become your own pharmacist, you're screwing with your homeostasis. Okay? So, what happens if you're not doing the HCG and you're doing the steroids? Not only do your testicles shrink, but the hypothalamus stops releasing dopamine as a prolactin inhibitor, and those guys begin to make a little bit of milk. It could never nurse a child, but they make a little bit of milk, and then the oxytocin causes the release. So how do you know it's happening? They have Band-Aids over their nipples because they're embarrassed that they're leaking from their nipples. And guys, I'm not trying to be weird, and I'm actually not saying it to be funny, because it's not funny when somebody's messing with their endocrine system that environment. Okay? Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So, growth hormone, we're going to get into great detail about growth hormone. It's anterior pituitary, and circadian rhythm. What does it do? So guys, listen to me. Here's what I want you to know about growth hormone. What does it do? It makes more lean muscle. It increases lean muscle mass. It increases bone density. And it gets rid of adipose tissue, especially baby fat. So, yes, there are lots of people who take growth hormone. Hey, not only do I take testosterone so I can be big and bulky, I want to be lean and mean. So I got to get rid of the fat. And so how do I do that? I think I'll take some growth hormone too. Okay? I don't care about this slide. Prolactin. Well, I think I've said all that I really want to say about prolactin. Okay? Gonadotropins. So men and women make FSH and LH. Okay? And in guys, the LH stimulates testosterone production. In females, it helps with the estrogen progesterone cycle, and it also helps to bring about ovulation. FSH does gametogenesis in both genders, so helps to make sperm in guys and helps to mature a follicle in the ovary for a woman so that it can get released. Okay. Thyroid hormone, talk about that. And we're going to talk way more in 2 weeks about all of these. ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Adrenal gland has 2 regions, the cortex and the medulla. The medulla is what? That's where the catecholamines are made. Tyrosine-based, water-soluble. It's in the cortex where the steroids that the adrenal gland makes are made. Like what? Aldosterone, okay, and cortisol. So, and we'll get to those. Hear about that. So thyroid. I said T3 and T4 were the thyroid hormones, okay, that the thyroid gland makes. T3 is the active form. T4 is the inactive form. What do the 3 and the 4 stand for? The number of iodines that are attached. Okay? So if there are 3 iodines attached only to the thyroid hormone, that means it's in its active form. If there are 4, it's in its inactive form. Does that make sense to you guys? So listen, I'm only talking to people who do not have a thyroid problem in the room. If you have a thyroid problem, ignore what I'm about to say. If you do use salt, those of you who do not have a thyroid problem. If you do use salt, you want to use iodized salt. Because if you don't use iodized salt, the salt that you put in your body helps blanch out thyroid hormone, and you can become hypothyroid. Okay? For those people who have lots and lots of rice, white rice specifically, if you have lots of white rice, and what's white rice? Those sweet-looking packets of simple sugars. Oh, you're saying that white rice isn't healthy? Jim, half the world eats white rice. Right, and they don't have sonic, and they don't eat that much meat, or if they do eat meat, it's lean, and they eat a lot of vegetables, and they have to walk forever paying for it. Okay? So the metaphor fails miserably. Okay? So if you're gonna eat a lot of rice, unless you're eating like you ate in the old country, and if you were born here, then don't eat lots of rice. Okay? If you eat rice, eat brown rice. Right? But if you eat a lot of rice and it's not thymine and niacin enriched, you can develop thyroid problems. Okay? That's all I'm saying. I'm not gonna say any more about it. Don't email me. You can look it up. There's lots of good lay stuff on this stuff. All right? White rice is bad unless you're used to eating in a very healthy way. So, Jim, how come they serve it at all these Asian restaurants or in Persian restaurants? I mean, gosh, gave what M. John with some Persian rice, man. Oh my God, that's living. Okay? But those people are eating Sonic. Right, Abraham? Yeah, they're not stopping at Taco Bell, once or twice a week. They're not using, sour cream on things, just so they can afford to have the carbs. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. Bottom line is, though, that if you eat a lot of white rice and it's not thymine and niacin enriched, you can develop a thyroid problem. If you use salt that's not iodized, you can develop a thyroid problem. Jim, I use healthy salt, bro. I pay 5 times more for sodium chloride because I get Himalayan pink salt. And I know that that's healthy. Guys, sodium chloride. And, I know, right? Most of you probably spend all that kind of money and are completely convinced that I'm a moron. I'm good with that. Please keep the US economy going. That's all that you're doing. Okay? Sorry. Yes?
Okay. If you don't have a thyroid, do you need iodine to help with like your hormone?
So, iodine is important for a bunch of things. And it's actually, if you eat certain foods, it's present, that's all you have to have. Okay? If you don't have a thyroid, you're obviously on medication. And you want to be super careful about the iodine you take in. So that's a great question, Heidi. Okay? So, you don't need to know that it's the follicular cells of the thyroid gland that actually make T3 and T4, but you do need to know that it's follicular cells that are the boundary of the storage chambers of T3 and T4. Okay? Makes sense to you guys? Because when we talk about Hashimoto's, you tear apart what? The follicular cells, and you dump accidentally a whole bunch of T3 and T4 in circulation. So which one's prevalent? T4 is. 90% of the thyroid hormone floating around is T4. Why? We don't flipping want T3 because T3 is the active form and it automatically jacks metabolism. We want it in the inactive form so the cells can activate it. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. All right. That slide and a bunch of other slides say this. What is it? It's a negative feedback, three-tiered anterior pituitary system for the thyroid hormone. Make sense? Yes? Okay. So, what happens if you have T3 and T4 in low quantities? That's hypo, and I know there's slides on it, we'll get to them, but I want to talk conceptually. So you slow down your metabolism. What happens when you slow down your metabolism? You can't concentrate as effectively. Why? Because the neurons are governed by thyroid hormone, right? How much energy they take in the form of glucose and how much they process it to make ATP, that's regulated how? By T3 and T4. So maybe you can't concentrate that much. You might be a little bit extra sleepy. You might be a little bit cold. Might not have as much energy. Okay? Might actually have put a few pounds on. There was this great gimmick back in the 90s when I was receiving my medical training, and to make patients feel better, if you went into OB/GYN practice or you went into family practice or internal medicine practice, you were admonished to tell the patient, oh, it's probably just a mild thyroid problem, okay? Well, that was bullshit. Here in this state, we have an unusually and extremely exaggerated number of patients with thyroid problems. Why? We talked about it. It's because of all the uranium that was released into aquifers, etc., during World War II. The Navajo Res has 676 unremediated uranium mines. 676. Those precious kids go and they play with the animals, and the birds come and they land and they go here and there, and it gets into their systems. The highest location of the most strange and exotic urinary system cancers in the world is in Gallup. Okay? Yes?
Just as question, if you know what would lead to this. Now they're finding out that among a lot of the elite athletes, that they are taking thyroid hormone. So they are coming up with the fact saying that they have a thyroid problem to be on the thyroid hormone. What would be the cause behind that? What advantage will it give to an athlete?
You can burn off all the extra fat and have a whole lot more just lean muscle mass. And I don't want to talk more about that at all. That's a good question. But to go back, so if you have hypothyroid, things are slowed down, basically. You might have put on a few pounds, etc. What if you're hyperthyroid? If you're hyperthyroid, you have a hard time keeping weight on. You might be fidgeting. If you're a female, both of them can interrupt menstrual cycles, hypo or hyperthyroid. You can have a hard time concentrating. You're the person who tends to be the warmest in the room. I do not have a thyroid problem, guys. Okay? I have Mediterranean ancestry, and I was born and raised in a poor family that we didn't have money for heat, and you get used to things, okay? But they're heat intolerant, and the worse the problem is, the worse they are. And if the hyperthyroidism goes untreated, you can get edema in all kinds of strange areas, like behind the eyes, so that the eyeballs get pushed out, and it's called exophthalmos. And there's a slide that has the word on there. Does anybody know who Marty Feldman was? Yeah, I love Marty Feldman.
Young Frankenstein is like my favorite movie.
A woman after my own heart. That's an amazing movie. You guys just Google Marty Feldman and look at images. He suffered from, I believe it was Graves' disease, but he suffered from hyperthyroidism. And he had eyes that were bulged out, and he looked freaky. Okay? He also smoked, I don't know, Mariah, if you know, he was able to swim miles and miles and miles, but he smoked 7.5 packs of cigarettes a day.
I did not know that. That's crazy.
And he ate, every breakfast was about a dozen eggs.
That I believe.
So you can imagine what happened to him. So hypothyroidism, slightly slower heart rate, maybe lower blood pressure. Hyperthyroidism, accelerated heart rate, elevated blood pressure. Okay? Over time, both can lead to death if they're not attended to. Steroid hormones. So the adrenal medulla, I said, is catecholamines. The cortex is where the steroid hormones are in the adrenal gland. Where are the adrenal glands? Right on top of the kidneys. Okay? So we have 3 sets of steroid hormones that the adrenal cortex makes. One is the glucocorticoids, cortisol or hydrocortisone. We call it prednisone when it's in pill form, tablet form. They're all the same thing. What do glucocorticoids do? Increase serum glucose levels. Listen, Adrenal glands, adrenaline. Adrenaline, epinephrine. Noradrenaline, norepinephrine. They're all interchangeable names. When you have the sympathetic nervous system firing because it's fight or flight, what happens? You need sugar, don't you? You need glucose to make more ATP to get away from whatever the hell the cause of the fight or flight stimulus is. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so if you're chronically stressed and you haven't developed effective ways of offloading that stress, dude, I smoke. Okay, great. Well, that actually is a sympathomimetic problem, which means that it's increasing your stress. No, you understand, after I've had a cigarette, I calm down. Yeah, okay, whatever. All right. Listen, people who are diabetic tend to be the sickest people around. Why? Because elevated glucose levels tamp down the immune system's response. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So, glucocorticoids, what do? They're anti-inflammatory in the broadest possible sense. They can help reduce inflammation, but they dial down the inflammatory response. Mineralocorticoids, well, aldosterone causes us to retain sodium. Water follows. It's the way we build up the vascular compartment. Renin, angiotensin, aldosterone cascade. Okay? And then we have the sex steroids. I'm not going to test you on those. Androgens. Suffice it to say that even after menopause, a woman still has some estrogen, just the way we do. Where does that estrogen come from? The adrenal glands. Okay? Females do have testosterone production. Where does that come from? Adrenal glands. Okay? So where are they located? The outermost layer, the glomerulosa. Jim, do we seriously have to know this? Yes. The outermost layer of the adrenal cortex is the glomerulosa. That's easy. You're taking the renal exam, right, in 2 weeks. Glomerulosa affects the glomerulus. Well, that's the aldosterone area. The middle region, the fasciculata, that's the glucocorticoids. And the innermost cortical region, the reticularis, that's where the androgens get in. Okay? The only takeaway here is that you see that pregnenolone, which is the precursor to progesterone, is the precursor to every single one of the adrenal cortex's hormones. So when I take birth control medicine that has a progesterone analog in it, yeah, you're affecting homeostasis in other regions of your body. Big time. Okay? We've already talked about this. So, categories, listen, I just went through aldosterone. We know about aldosterone. I told you about glucocorticoids. What do? Increase serum glucose levels. And that's for a trillion reasons. That's all you need to know. That's why I went past those slides. Does everybody get that? Okay. So, categories of endocrine disease, 3 categories conceptually. Not releasing enough, for whatever reasons. Releasing too much, for whatever reasons. Or, you're releasing the right amount, but the target cells, for whatever reasons, aren't as responsive as you want them to be. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So, what if it's primary hyposecretion? What do we say primary is? Level of the target gland. So if there's a primary hyposecretion thyroid problem, it means the thyroid isn't releasing enough T3 or T4. The problem's at the level of the thyroid itself. Does that make sense? What about secondary? Secondary problem means usually it's an anterior pituitary problem. There are a couple exceptions which say that it's a hypothalamic problem. Bottom line is, it's not the target organ, it's up in the brain. Make sense? Okay. Hypersecretion. Well, golly, this is the same thing. There's primary and there's secondary. In some cases, there's tertiary. Okay. Target cell hyporesponsiveness. There's a bunch of reasons why. I gave you the single most important reason why for purposes of Patho 2 and the final exam, and that's type 2 diabetes. You're releasing too much insulin, target cells for insulin don't want to be responsive as much anymore. Make sense, you guys? There's a bunch of other reasons why. And that is the end of chapter 39. And that's the end of class tonight. I don't need minute papers. I am going to pass the test back. Oh, so I will email everybody, but Andrea was extremely sweet to give me. So if you go on to the website at Keshet, if I think it's